Does anyone remember the first game they ever played? I don't remember how long ago it was, or even what time of the year it was, but it must have been sometime around the turn of the millennium, when one day I remember my brother and I being presented with a big box. Inside that box was a smaller gray box, and with it a bunch of even smaller gray boxes. It would turn out to be a Super Nintendo, with somewhere in the area of 12 to 15 games. Little did I know, what I was about to experience was something that would change my outlook on entertainment forever. At first, I thought it looked like a big piece of AV equipment that I wouldn't have much interest in as a small kid. But once I saw what it could do, I would be pretty impressed. You put one of the cartridges into it and a movie would play, but it wasn't like the video cassettes that I was used to. This was one you actually had to interact with using the remote control. And thus, my journey into becoming a gamer had begun. And that first game for me? Top Gear 2, better known outside of America as Top Racer 2. Anyone who has looked at the history of this channel can easily notice that I like racing games. Be they kart racers, simulation racers, or arcade-style racers, I like them all. This may or may not stem from my experience with Top Gear 2. But here's the funny part. I never actually finished Top Gear 2. Despite being an arcade-style racer for console, Top Gear 2 had the disposition of being a little more on the realistic side than it looks. And since there is a whole upgrade system that escalates depending on the quality of your performance in races, it was a little much for a kid my age to fully grasp. And so, despite starting the game countless times, I never actually saw the game to its conclusion, typically missing qualification within the first 2 to 3 cups. Since then, Top Gear 2 has sat as a long unfinished game, and that unfinished business started to weigh heavier on me as I got older. Late last year, I stumbled on a remaster of a number of Top Gear games, including Top Gear 2. I also turn 30 soon, so I thought it would only be appropriate that I finished the first game I ever played as the last major gamer action of my 20s. And thus, I bought the game and grinded out the 4 hours or so to the game's end. And just in time, it was finished. And with it came the satisfaction of closure, that I could finally finish my first game ever played. But how did the game hold up? Top Gear 2 is really interesting because the way it feels really does straddle the line between arcade racers and more realistic ones. I would venture to guess that this is probably the more realistic between the two numbered games in the series, at least from what I remember of Top Gear 1. Funnily enough, I found that the way this game handles, it kind of incentivizes the player to follow something resembling racing lines to some degree. Of course, thanks to technical limitations, it's not going to be as complicated as later racers, which would stand to benefit greatly from 3D technology, but it is surprising that there is some form of proper best practices in racing here. Some tracks are trickier than others, and some corners are steeper and longer than others. There were some instances where, despite having the best possible tires, I would still find myself being seemingly sucked off the side of the road, careening into a signpost, doing damage to my car. I found that slowing down is the best option in those areas of the track, and while I never used the brakes in this game, the fact that a console arcade-style racer from the 4th generation of consoles would ask you to let off the accelerator during a race to stay on the track during a particularly tight turn is hitherto unheard of. at least to me. Cornering in this game, however, never feels wrong, and the game does its best to give your car's handling the best feel it can. I think the game is successful in doing so. When you're able to nitro through a slalom of shallow curves following the natural racing line through them, leaving other racers in the dust, doing so never stops being satisfying. Speaking of which, aside from brakes, steering, and acceleration, you also have, well, nitro. The number of nitro charges you have is fixed, although some tracks have nitro cards on them, which will give you one extra charge per card picked up. Nitros will give you a burst of speed that can help making particularly tricky overtakes easier. There is some strategy in using them, however. While in some cases brute forcing your way to the top relying on nitro charges might help, I found that reckless use of nitro charges can also lead to crashing into barriers and other obstacles, which ultimately slow you down. There are other pickups on the tracks too, like extra money and speed up cards, which will give you a modest speed boost and lasts a little shorter than a nitro charge and gives you a more modest, less extreme speed boost than a nitro burst. These cards regenerate in the same space after every lap, which can give you a big advantage if you position your car correctly on the track. The goal of the game is to reach a qualifying spot in every race to move on to the next cup. You travel to 16 different countries or regions, each with 4 races each, making one whole run of the game consist of 64 races. In order to qualify, you must finish within the top 10, but if you want to earn points as part of the Grand Prix, you must finish within the top 6. Earning points will also net you a cash prize, which can then be accumulated and subsequently spent on upgrades for your car. The upgrades are essential to your progression through the Grand Prix, since the other racers become increasingly more competitive pretty quickly. You can upgrade your engine, tires, wet and dry, gearbox, nitro, front, side, and rear armor, and you can repaint your car for free. I went with a yellow car because yellow is my favorite color. Each upgrade comes in 4 grades. The base grade you start out with, and other grades which are indicated by higher prices. Probably the easiest upgrades to get early on are the nitros. To be totally honest, I'm not sure what these upgrades do, since I don't think they increase the number of charges you start with, or if they do, it's not the only thing they do. It's difficult for me to notice just because that was the last upgrade I bought after maxing everything else out. Tires improve handling, and weather conditions can dictate your car's handling characteristics in different ways depending on the weather and tires you choose. Armor gives your car greater resilience to crashes. One of the impressive things about Top Gear 2 is that it does simulate damage. Of course, you can't see the damage, but it does affect your car's performance over time, and you can definitely feel it. Your armor is indicated as part of your HUD on the left side of the screen. Better armor means more damage resistance. Engine upgrades can help make your car faster, but your engine will be limited in its performance by the quality of its gearbox. The gearbox and engine really work hand in hand to make your car faster, giving it both greater acceleration and a higher top speed. This is thanks to higher-end gearboxes having more forward gears and taller gearing, owed to the higher revs the engine is able to turn. When you couple these two upgrades maxed out alone, you find that you sometimes don't need any nitros if you know what you're doing getting around the track. If you couple these with maxed out nitro upgrades, however, you will find yourself going more than 300 kilometers an hour, provided you don't crash, and those moments are admittedly incredible. racing conditions are affected by both weather and time of day. My least favorite races are the night ones. Visibility is low, lower than even foggy conditions. And while yes, I understand that the mini-map on the HUD can be looked at for reference, on later tracks, some turns are so small they aren't exactly visible, and they come up so fast you might find more often than not that these turns catch you entirely by surprise. I also found it a little difficult to navigate around other racers, partially due to the nature of the graphics limitations of the time. Judging distance from yourself to another car is mostly intuitive, but if you do hit a car from behind, it slows you down harshly. And in later races, other racers behind you can pass you in bunches. Thanks to the fact that the level of sprite scaling in games like Outrun isn't exactly feasible on the consoles of the time, even with the Super Nintendo and its comparatively limited sprite scaling capabilities, the developers opted to do a sort of LOD effect with the other racers instead. I might be wrong, but while playing the game I counted 9 different levels of detail on distant car sprites as you approach them from behind. While this is pretty good for what it's worth, it isn't perfect, and so judging distance can sometimes be tricky, especially in some scenarios that require quick reactions. It's something that takes getting used to, but it was a bit of a point of frustration later on in the game, especially when I would be well into the race and stuck in the back of the pack just because I keep hitting the same guy over and over again. One of the nice things about this game is that the difficulty isn't linear. At least it doesn't seem like it. Sometimes the difficulty is in the track design and or conditions. Sometimes the difficulty is in the skill of the racers, and sometimes it's some combination of all of those things. Contending with these different elements gives Top Gear 2's gameplay a sense of variety that, whether deliberate or not, makes for a surprisingly varied experience. It's easy to sink 2 to 3 hours into this game thanks to the quality of the races and tracks, and the differences you could potentially approach them with based on whichever upgrades you choose to equip your car with in different runs. There is a surprisingly high amount of replay value here. For a game whose appearance suggests there isn't much to it under the hood, is a game that does offer a lot of potential for varied playthroughs for those who care about those sorts of things. There are also difficulty levels on top of the difficulty within the Grand Prix. Because I was contending with the time constraints, I went with the default difficulty, which happened to be amateur. But I kind of want to go back and revisit this game on a higher difficulty, especially with the add-ons the HD remaster offers. And that's one of the cool things about games these days. At first I thought I would have to buy a whole new cartridge for the Super Famicom for this, which isn't exactly easy to find, at least not here in Japan. But that's when I learned that Qubit, a Brazilian development team, remastered a handful of Top Gear games and packaged them into one collection. This collection, I can't remember where I heard about it, but it was one of the games I ultimately found out about in time for this Steam 2024 winter sale, and it was thanks to this game that I was able to make Top Gear 2 the last game I beat in my 20s so readily. I'm not sponsored or anything, but it was so cool for me to have such easy access to my first ever video game I ever played readily available in such a way. While playing through this game, it was right on the heels of having finished my big classic Doom marathon. I had only days to finish this game, and since I have a day job that was beginning again after a long vacation, I knew that if I wanted to beat this game before my 30th birthday, I needed to be diligent and learn the game quickly and get through it. Although the game took me about 5 hours to get through, the bulk of which was done during a 3-hour binge, that really didn't feel like 3 hours. But there came a point during that 3-hour binge when I kind of realized that I was racing towards the end of the game, almost like I felt like time was racing to the end of my 20s. I was racing against time, racing against me to finish a racing game. I found that fact mildly amusing. I don't know if it was really for closure that I decided to undertake this kind of rushed project, but it just kind of felt right. With so many other projects underway at the same time, I could have easily replaced this one with one of the others, which were in much more advanced stages of their development than this one when I started it. But sometimes that's just how my mind works, I suppose. I'm glad I was able to finish my first ever video game as my last act of being a 20-something, arbitrary as it may seem. Being able to see that end screen and see the credits roll and feeling that unfinished business was finally taken care of, and somewhere a very young version of myself is finally relieved to know that there is indeed an end to this game. After all, over the years, the SNES games I had, which had single-player campaigns with a story and ending, have been finished for the most part, including games like Doom and Turn and Burn No-Fly Zone. Looking back, I don't know if I could really say that my SNES library was all that impressive, but the first 2 Top Gear games, Super Mario All-Stars, Super Mario World, Where in Time is Carmen Sandiego, and the aforementioned Doom and Turn and Burn No-Fly Zone kept me busy, and I was more than happy with those. After considering now that I have a Super Famicom and live in a country where it is considerably more affordable to collect the big titles for the console, it only makes sense that I waited as long as I did before establishing a real, proper 16-bit Nintendo game collection. Top Gear 2 means a lot to me in some ways, despite how easy it is to forget about it in light of its contemporaries in this 16-bit era. This is especially when considering the fact that a lot of people tend to treat this game as more of an asset flip by Tecmo of their Lotus series of games. But memories of seeing how I could interact with the images on the screen and how difficult it was to stay on the road and thinking I could just cut through the grass to get past everyone, hitting all the barriers on the track because it looked cool and thinking that it made me go faster when it really definitely didn't, are all memories and thoughts and images I have from my initial experience with this game. They stick with me stubbornly, but not obtrusively so, but can be recalled quickly when I decide to do so. Maybe I'm taking this game way too seriously, but it was ultimately this experience that conditioned me for the interests that I would later develop. I probably wouldn't be active on this channel without it. And I think that's what makes art and media so potentially powerful. This video exists because of the efforts of a game development team from the UK over 30 years ago. Isn't that neat? So I guess I just wanted to end this video posing a question to those who have humored me up to this point. What was your first video game? Do you remember how you were introduced to it? What about the experience do you remember? Have you finished it? Do you still play it? Share your stories in the comments below. I always like hearing others' thoughts and stories on this kind of stuff. While you do that, I'll be working on my next video. Until then, I hope to see you there. Keep retro maxin'.